You are not in the wrong relationship, you just have relationship anxiety. Today's episode is for that person who keeps asking, what if I'm in the wrong relationship even though nothing is actually wrong? If you have been dealing with constant doubt, anxiety, or overthinking in your relationship, this episode is for you. Hello my friend, my name is Precious Olalere and I would like to welcome you to the Cut of Love podcast, where we rule on matters of the heart using biblical principles. Before we get into this, I want to be very clear about something. This episode is not about diagnosing anyone. I'm not here to put labels on you or to tell you what you have. However, this conversation is really about understanding why anxiety can show up even in good relationships. Relationships that are actually very free of chaos, relationship that is not toxic in any way, and relationships that are actually godly and very healthy. Because I believe that as Christians, we've been taught that if you feel any form of anxiety or if you feel anxious in your relationship, it must be a warning sign from God. And we've been taught that if you feel any form of doubt in your relationship, it means that you do not have faith. And so when anxiety shows up in our relationship, instead of us to get curious about it, we immediately assume that something is wrong, either with the relationship or something is wrong with us spiritually. And that belief alone creates a lot of pressure. Because now you are not just navigating a relationship, you are also questioning your discernment, you are questioning your faith, and you are questioning whether you are actually even hearing God correctly about your relationship. You see, anxiety doesn't only show up when something is wrong. Anxiety can also show up when something feels very unfamiliar to you, and when your nervous system is not used to peace, or even when your mind is trying to protect you from danger, even when there is no real danger currently present. This anxiety is caused by obsessive compulsive disorder, which is known as OCD, or in this case, relationship obsessive compulsive disorder, which is known as ROCD. And so I'm going to be interchanging the name during this episode. So when I talk about ROCD or when I talk about relationship anxiety, I'm referring to the same thing. Okay? So when I talk about relationship anxiety or relationship OCD, I'm talking about, that internal experience, the constant questioning, the overanalyzing of your feelings, the fear of getting it wrong, and the pressure to actually feel a certain way all the time in your relationship. And especially for Christian relationship, anxiety or relationship OCD can actually even feel heavier, because now you're not just questioning if your relationship is right or wrong, you're questioning if you actually like that person. It's become a case of, God, am I really hearing your will about this relationship? What if I miss God's will in this relationship? Or what if me being in this relationship is a disobedience to God's leading? And you start to have this overthinking and overanalyzing, despite the fact that God has given you instruction concerning that relationship. You just can't shake off that feeling of that constant fear of whether you are in the right relationship, or whether you're actually in the will of God in that relationship. If you are feeling this way, it's okay, you are not the only one. The truth is, a lot of Christians actually experience anxiety in relationships, and immediately they start to assume that it must be a warning sign from God. God is trying to tell them something. I know sometimes that can be true, but then sometimes what's actually happening is not spiritual at all. In fact, it is neurological. And that's the space that I want us to sit in today's episode. Not a space of fear, not a space of self-blame, but a space of actually understanding how we can separate, anxiety from discernment, and, actually learn how to respond to it with wisdom instead of panic. So, you might ask, what is relationship anxiety or ROCD, which is also known as relationship obsessive compulsive disorder? You see, relationship OCD is actually a subtheme of obsessive compulsive disorder, and it is actually on the lower spectrum of the obsessive compulsive disorder, which is also known as OCD. So I might actually use this interchangeably. Okay, so relationship OCD or relationship anxiety is actually the fear of being in the wrong relationship, the fear of not truly loving your partner, or the fear of not being truly loved by your partner. Now, what makes this different from the normal doubt that an average human would experience is that this fear would often show up even when there are no actual red flags in your relationship. Nothing bad is actually happening in your relationship. Your partner is constantly showing up in that relationship. Your relationship is stable, but internally there is this constant questioning. And for Christians, this is especially important, and this is because you will care deeply about being in God's will for our life. And so the thought of even thinking that what if this relationship is not God's will, what if I'm disobeying God, and what if I'm actually missing it by being in this relationship, or what if I'm forcing something that God never truly ordained, can actually make us go crazy sometimes, because you are constantly thinking, you are constantly overanalyzing, and you are wondering if you are truly in God's will. Now, you might ask, why do I always feel this way? Why am I always constantly overthinking, overanalyzing my relationship? You see, God created us with an almond-shaped cluster of neurons, also known as amygdala. This is what actually helps us to process our emotions, our fear, and anxiety. This amygdala is what also alerts our brains to danger or threats. But people with ROCD, your amygdala is actually very hypersensitive, and so that's the reason why you experience anxiety even when there is no actual danger or threat. This hypersensitivity doesn't come from just anywhere. It's actually influenced by our environment, our upbringing, trauma, and even genetics. And you see, anxiety disorders like OCD and PTSD often exist in the same family system. I think this is very important for Christians to hear. You experiencing fear or constant doubt in your relationship, that does not mean that you lack faith. It doesn't mean that you don't trust God enough, to submit your relationship to Him. It just means that your nervous system has learned to stay alert even when there is no actual danger. And I've talked about that. The fact that your nervous system is hypersensitive, it's because of, nature versus nurture, which basically means the environment that you grew up in. Maybe that is what has, exposed your nervous system to danger, and as a result of that, you have now become hypersensitive even when there is no real danger. OCD is characterized by repetitive, intrusive, and distressing thoughts, images, and impulses, which is called obsessions. And in simple terms, these obsessions are usually like the thoughts and the doubts that you have in your mind that often lead to anxiety. And the things that you actually, engage in to deal with that anxiety is what we call compulsions. And there are different types of compulsions, which I'm going to go over in a little bit. You see, when we talk about compulsions, it's important to understand that most of them don't actually look very dramatic. In fact, a lot of them look very normal. They look like things that we all do. The only difference is why we are doing them and how often. The first one I want to talk about is reassurance-seeking compulsion. Reassurance-seeking is, when you go to other people like your friends, your mentors, your family, to calm your anxiety about your relationship. Not to genuinely seek wisdom, but to actually make yourself feel comfortable, to make that uncomfortable feeling go away. And so it would usually look like asking your family or your friends questions like, do you think this relationship is right? Do you think I really love my partner? Do you think God would want me to continue to stay in this relationship? You can ask questions like, is it normal to even feel this way that I'm feeling? And the thing is, the reassurance usually works for a moment. You feel calmer, your chest starts to relax, your mind settles. But then the thought comes back again, and when it comes back stronger. So you might ask them again, but this time you might be asking someone different, you might be asking different questions, but they're still revolving around the rightness of your relationship. It's still revolving around if you think that your relationship is something that you should still stay in, despite the fact that nothing is even wrong in your relationship. And slowly, without you even realizing it, you start outsourcing your peace to other people. That's how reassurance seeking keeps the circle of, anxiety alive. Another form of compulsion is avoidance. This one is very sneaky because it feels like you are protecting yourself. It feels like self-protection. Avoidance is when you start avoiding, the things that trigger your anxiety, not because they are dangerous, but because they make you feel uncomfortable. So, instead of you to deal with the anxiety, you start to shrink your world, and you might start to avoid, having deep conversations with your partner. You start avoiding thinking about the future, and you start even avoiding praying about your relationship, and you start to spend more time alone with your thoughts. Sometimes it can also look like emotional distancing, and sometimes it can look like you are constantly trying to stay busy so that you don't have to think about your relationship. And sometimes it can even look like you are pulling yourself away from that relationship altogether. You see, why avoidance gives short-term relief, but it starts to teach your brain that the trigger that is sent to your brain was actually very dangerous, and then it continues to keep you in that loop. Then number 3, there is mental compulsion, and this one is probably the hardest one to notice, because mental compulsions usually feel like overthinking, but they are actually anxiety management that is happening in your brain. It's more of like a coping mechanism that you have designed for your brain. And this is when you start to replay conversations that you've had with your partner. You start to analyze how you felt about your partner yesterday versus today. You try to figure out if your feelings are actually enough. And then you start to mentally text scenarios in your head, like, if I lose my partner today, how would it make me feel? And it feels very productive, like, you are trying to gain clarity on that relationship. But what you're actually doing is that you're trying to outthink anxiety. And you see, the reason why this type of compulsion is very hard to, isolate is because no one else is going to see it happen. Like, it's all happening internally in your head. And you can be sitting quietly and you even look calm on the outside, but your mind is actually running non-stop. The last type is the overt compulsion, which are the ones that people would usually associate with OCD. These are like physical behaviors or even rituals that that you are always repeating over and over until you get that just right feeling. And that can look like you are repeatedly washing your hands, you are compulsively organizing or rearranging your space, you are checking your locks, you are checking your doors multiple times, and you are repeating actions until they actually feel very complete to you. And the common thread here is that this isn't just about the behavior itself. It's the purpose. It's not just about you doing it because it needs to be done. It's because you are doing it because your anxiety is actually telling you that it is not safe yet. And once you get that moment of relief, your brain learns that pattern, and so next time it asks you to do it again, and then you keep doing it over and over and over again. What ties all of this compulsion together is that they are all attempts that your mind is making to escape that discomfort. And the thing is, the more you respond to anxiety by trying to escape it, the more powerful it becomes. The goal isn't to eliminate anxiety overnight. The goal is to stop feeding it. And that's where real freedom starts. If you recognize yourself engaging in any of these compulsions, reassurance seeking, avoidance, overthinking, or physical behaviors, I don't want you to leave this episode feeling alarmed or even labeled. That's not the point of this episode. The point of this episode is to create awareness. Because you see, a lot of us have been fighting anxiety by engaging with it, responding to it, and trying to fix it, and then you are wondering why it keeps coming back louder. The issue is that your mind has learned a pattern, and patterns can be unlearned. For my Christian audience especially, I want to say this clearly. Having intrusive thoughts does not mean that they are from God. And feeling anxious does not mean that you are being warned by God. God is not an author of confusion. God is not in a rush. He is not frantic. It does not lead through panic or pressure. Sometimes faith looks like trusting God enough to not respond to every thought that crosses your mind. If this episode resonated with you, let it be an invitation to actually give yourself grace. You don't have to figure everything out today. You don't have to feel certain to be obedient, and you certainly don't have to punish yourself for having a sensitive nervous system. Take what was helpful, leave what was not helpful, but sit with it, pray about it, and if needed, seek wise professional support. That doesn't make you less spiritual, it makes you wise. Alright, that's everything that I have for you today on this episode. In our next episode, we'll be covering, the various forms of relationship anxiety and why you actually experience it, even in a healthy and God-ordained relationship. If this episode blessed you, don't forget to smash the like button and share it with a friend or someone who needs it. Don't also forget to subscribe so that you'll be the first person to get notified when I make a new upload like this. Till I come your way again next time, stay blessed.